Picture this. It's August 6, 1806. In a modest palace in Vienna, a man sits at his desk, his hand trembling as he holds a quill. With a few strokes of ink, Francis II is about to end something that has existed longer than any of us can truly comprehend. The Holy Roman Empire. 1006 years. Let that sink in for a moment. While kingdoms rose and fell like waves on a shore, while entire civilizations crumbled to dust, this empire endured. And now, in one afternoon, it was about to vanish forever. But here's what they don't teach you in history class. This wasn't just the end of an empire. This was the death of an idea that had shaped the very soul of Europe for a millennium. An idea that God himself had blessed an earthly ruler to unite all of Christendom under one crown. The Holy Roman Empire wasn't just a political entity. It was a dream. A dream that began with Charlemagne in 800 AD, when Pope Leo III placed a crown upon his head and declared him Emperor of the Romans. But by 1806, that dream had become a nightmare. You see, empires don't die overnight. They die slowly, painfully, like a great oak tree rotting from the inside. And the Holy Roman Empire. It had been rotting for centuries, held together by nothing more than tradition and stubborn pride. By the time Napoleon Bonaparte came thundering across Europe with his revolutionary armies, the Holy Roman Empire was already a ghost of its former self. Voltaire famously mocked it as neither holy, nor Roman, nor an empire. But even he couldn't have predicted how brutally it would meet its end. The empire that once stretched from the Baltic Sea to the Mediterranean, from the Rhine to the Danube, had become a patchwork of over 300 independent territories. Imagine trying to govern a country where every county had its own laws, its own currency, its own army. It was chaos masquerading as order. The emperors had become figureheads, desperately clinging to a title that meant less with each passing year. The real power belonged to the princes, the dukes, the archbishops, men who paid lip service to imperial authority while building their own little kingdoms. When Napoleon swept across the German states in 1805, he didn't conquer the Holy Roman Empire. He simply exposed its weakness for all the world to see. The Battle of Austerlitz wasn't just a military defeat. It was a humiliation that shattered any remaining illusion of imperial power. Here's what's truly heartbreaking about this story. Francis II wasn't a bad man. Historical records show he was genuinely devoted to his subjects and deeply troubled by the empire's decline. He knew that keeping the imperial title meant nothing when he couldn't protect the people who looked to him for leadership. But Napoleon wasn't interested in preserving ancient traditions. He was building a new Europe, one where merit mattered more than bloodline, where efficiency trumped ceremony. The Confederation of the Rhine, which he established in 1806, was everything the Holy Roman Empire wasn't. Unified, organized, and utterly loyal to French interests. Picture Francis II in those final days, walking through the corridors of his palace, past portraits of emperors who had ruled when the title still meant something. Charles V, who had controlled half the known world. Frederick Barbarossa, who had made kings tremble at the mention of his name. What thoughts must have haunted him? The irony is almost unbearable. The empire that had styled itself as the heir to ancient Rome was finally meeting the same fate as its predecessor. Destroyed not by barbarians at the gates, but by its own inability to adapt to a changing world. When Francis II finally put pen to paper on August 6, 1806, he wrote these words: "We hereby declare that we regard the bond which has hitherto united us to the body of the German Empire as dissolved." Just like that, 1,000 years of history became a footnote. But here's where the story becomes even more tragic. The Holy Roman Empire didn't just disappear, it was replaced by something far more dangerous. Napoleon's conquest of German-speaking Europe planted seeds that would grow into German nationalism, and eventually, into the conflicts that would tear the continent apart. Think about it. If the Holy Roman Empire had somehow survived, if it had managed to reform itself, would we have seen the rise of Prussia? Would there have been a German Empire under the Kaisers? Would the world have endured 2 devastating world wars? The death of the Holy Roman Empire created a vacuum that ambitious men rushed to fill. Otto von Bismarck understood this better than anyone when he created the German Empire in 1871. He knew that Germans longed for the unity they had lost, even if they had never truly possessed it under the old empire. What makes this story so compelling is that it's not really about politics or war, it's about the power of ideas. For 1,000 years, people believed in the Holy Roman Empire not because it was effective, but because it represented something greater than themselves. It was the earthly reflection of divine order. When that belief died, it left behind a spiritual emptiness that would echo through European history for generations. The romantic nationalism of the 19th century, the totalitarian movements of the 20th century. These were all, in part, attempts to fill the void left by the empire's collapse. I've spent years studying this period, and one document always gives me chills. A letter from a minor German prince to his son, written just days after the empire's dissolution. He wrote, "Today we are Germans without Germany, Christians without Christendom, subjects without a sovereign." God help us find our way in this new world. That letter captures something profound about human nature. Our need to belong to something larger than ourselves. The Holy Roman Empire, for all its flaws, had provided that sense of belonging for 30 generations of Europeans. The emperors knew they were guardians of something sacred. When they held the imperial regalia, the crown of Charlemagne, the holy lance that had supposedly pierced Christ's side, they weren't just holding symbols of political power. They were touching history itself. But symbols mean nothing without substance. By 1800, the crown was still magnificent. The ceremony is still elaborate, but the empire beneath them had hollowed out like termite-damaged wood. The Austrian archdukes who held the imperial title couldn't even protect their own hereditary lands from French invasion. Napoleon understood the power of symbolism too, which is why he was so careful in how he dismantled the empire. He didn't just defeat it militarily, he replaced its symbols with his own. The Confederation of the Rhine had new flags, new anthems, new ceremonies. He was erasing not just political structures, but cultural memory itself. What's fascinating is how different regions reacted to the empire's end. In Austria, there was relief. Finally, the Habsburgs could focus on being Austrian emperors rather than trying to manage an ungovernable collection of German principalities. In Prussia, there was opportunity. Now they could position themselves as the natural leaders of German-speaking Europe. But in the smaller German states, there was genuine grief. These princes and their subjects had defined themselves in relation to the empire for centuries. Without it, who were they? What was their purpose? Many of these rulers had libraries filled with genealogies proving their ancient connection to imperial service. Suddenly, all of that history seemed worthless. The common people's reaction is harder to document, but contemporary accounts suggest a mix of confusion and resignation. For most peasants and artisans, the emperor had been a distant figure anyway. Their loyalty was to their immediate lord, their village, their trade guild. The empire's end affected their daily lives far less than it affected their sense of identity. Yet something profound had shifted. The idea that legitimate authority flowed from God through the emperor to the princes to the people. This great chain of being that had ordered European society for centuries was broken. In its place came new ideas about popular sovereignty, national identity, and individual rights. Napoleon may have intended to create a more rational political order, but he unleashed forces he couldn't control. The very nationalism he used to mobilize Germans against their old rulers would eventually be turned against France itself. The War of Liberation in 1813 wasn't just about defeating Napoleon, it was about reclaiming German identity. This is where our story takes a dark turn. The new German identity that emerged from the Holy Roman Empire's ashes was harder, more exclusive, more militaristic than what had come before. The old empire, for all its inefficiency, had been genuinely multicultural. German, Italian, Slavic, French-speaking peoples all had their place within its borders. The new nationalism that replaced it was different. It demanded linguistic unity, cultural conformity, and absolute loyalty. The romantic notion of the Volk, the people united by blood and soil, began to take root in ways that would have horrified the cosmopolitan Habsburg emperors of the 18th century. I often wonder what would have happened if Francis II had chosen differently. What if he had refused to abdicate? What if he had called upon all Germans to resist Napoleon in the name of the empire? Would it have made any difference, or would it have simply prolonged the agony? Historical documents suggest that Francis considered this option seriously. His advisors were divided. Some argued that maintaining the imperial title, even in exile, would preserve legitimacy for future restoration. Others insisted that clinging to empty symbols would only invite further humiliation. In the end, Francis chose pragmatism over romance. He recognized that the Holy Roman Empire was already dead in all but name, and that formally acknowledging this reality might actually preserve Habsburg power in their hereditary lands. It was a calculation that probably saved Austria from complete dismemberment, but it also marked the end of medieval Europe. Because that's really what we're talking about here, the final death of the medieval world. The Holy Roman Empire was the last major institution that claimed authority based on divine right rather than popular consent or military might. Its end marked the triumph of modernity over tradition. And yet, the empire's ghost continued to haunt European politics for decades. The German Confederation that replaced it was a pale imitation, lacking both the grandeur of the old empire and the efficiency of modern nation-states. It satisfied no one and pleased even fewer. When Bismarck finally unified Germany in 1871, he deliberately evoked imperial imagery. The new German Empire was proclaimed in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, with the Prussian king taking the title of Kaiser, the German version of Caesar. But this new empire was fundamentally different from its predecessor. Where the Holy Roman Empire had been universal in aspiration, the German Empire was explicitly national. The tragedy is that both empires ended in world wars. The Holy Roman Empire's death helped create the conditions for the Napoleonic Wars, which reshaped Europe entirely. The German Empire's death in 1918 led directly to the chaos of the Weimar Republic and the rise of even darker forces. This pattern repeats throughout history. When ancient institutions collapse, they leave behind power vacuums that extremists rush to fill. The measured, conservative stability that characterized the later Holy Roman Empire may have been inefficient, but it was also peaceful. The revolutionary energies that destroyed it ultimately proved far more destructive than the problems they were meant to solve. As I've researched this topic over the years, I've become convinced that we can't understand modern European history without grappling with this loss. The Holy Roman Empire wasn't just another medieval monarchy, it was the last attempt to create a truly universal Christian political order. Its failure marked the beginning of the Age of Nationalism, with all the triumphs and horrors that followed. Every major European conflict since 1806 can be traced, at least partially, to the unresolved tensions created by the empire's collapse. So what can we learn from this thousand-year dream and its tragic end? Perhaps that institutions, no matter how ancient or venerable, must evolve or die. The Holy Roman Empire failed not because it was evil, but because it couldn't adapt to changing circumstances. Perhaps we should also remember that political legitimacy is never permanent. The divine right that seemed so solid to medieval emperors proved to be as fragile as morning mist when confronted with revolutionary armies and new ideas about popular sovereignty. Most importantly, we should understand that the end of the Holy Roman Empire wasn't just a political event, it was a spiritual crisis that reverberates to this day. When people lost faith in the idea that earthly authority reflected divine order, they had to find new sources of meaning and belonging. Some found it in nationalism, others in revolutionary ideologies, still others in romantic notions of racial or cultural superiority. All of these movements, in their own way, were attempts to reconstruct the sense of cosmic purpose that the Holy Roman Empire had once provided. The question that haunts me as I finish this story is whether we've learned anything from this tragedy. In our own age of political upheaval and institutional collapse, are we repeating the same patterns that led to the empire's downfall? Are our current institutions adapting quickly enough to changing circumstances, or are they becoming as sclerotic and ineffective as the Holy Roman Empire in its final years? And if they do collapse, what will rise to take their place? History doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. The death of the Holy Roman Empire reminds us that no political order, no matter how established it seems, is permanent. But it also reminds us that what replaces fallen institutions isn't always better than what came before. The thousand-year dream didn't have to end the way it did. With different choices, different leaders, different circumstances, it might have evolved into something that could have survived and thrived in the modern world. Instead, it became a cautionary tale about the price of failing to change with the times. But perhaps that's the most valuable lesson of all. The Holy Roman Empire's death wasn't inevitable. It was the result of countless individual decisions made by people who thought they were acting for the best. History is made by human choices, and those choices always matter, even when we can't see their full consequences. What do you think? Could the Holy Roman Empire have survived if it had reformed itself earlier? Or was its collapse inevitable in the face of revolutionary change? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this deep dive into one of history's most fascinating turning points compelling, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more stories about the moments that shaped our world. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. And let me know what other historical mysteries you'd like me to explore. The fall of empires always teaches us something about our own times. What lessons do you think we should take from this thousand-year dream that ended with the stroke of a pen? Share your insights below. Your perspective might be exactly what someone else needs to hear. Tell us which country or city you're watching from. See you in the next video. Bye.